Okay, so today we are going to continue reading in the book of Ezekiel. We left off yesterday at the end of Ezekiel's account of his first vision of God, which covered what we number as Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 1 through chapter 3 verse 15. And he sees this vision of God coming to him while riding God's chariot. Remember, Ezekiel lives in a world of chariots, so to communicate the idea of God being mobile, God appears to Ezekiel in the form of riding an enormous chariot with the cherubim, or the living creatures. We haven't identified them as cherubim yet, with the living creatures kind of pulling the chariot along and holding up the platform on which God's throne is situated. And these wheels that are next to the cherubim that move in any direction and have eyes all around, so they can go anywhere and they can see everything. And so God speaks to Ezekiel, sets him on his feet after he passes out or falls face down. I'm not really sure, when we see these visions we have it with John Revelation and all that, like, I don't know if they're falling into a coma and just like literally passing out from the shock, or if they're falling face down in reverence. I could see it. I mean, obviously they would fall face down in reverence, but it's possible they're just losing control of themselves and literally passing out and falling into some sort of stupor. I really don't know. I never have experienced this. I don't know what that experience is like. Anyway, God sets him on his feet, talks to him, gives him his vision, gives him his mission, speaks to him, gives him his mission, and gives him his spirit too, so he can carry out this mission. And then when Ezekiel snaps back to the present reality around him and the vision goes away, he sits there stunned for 7 days, or overwhelmed, as the English word here in this version says, for 7 days. So Ezekiel 3:16 picks up the story after that. Now remember, the 7-day period has a couple of significances. One is, as I mentioned last time, that the priests, which Ezekiel was supposed to be a priest, never actually got to serve as a priest because he was taken away into captivity before he could. But he was trained to be a priest and was going to be a priest if this hadn't happened. And the priest had a 7-day consecration period. There's also the idea of a 7-day mourning period when Jacob dies at the end of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 50. Chapter 50 verse 10. They reached the threshing floor near the Jordan. They lamented loudly and bitterly. This is in the wake of Jacob's death. And there Joseph, Jacob's son, observed a 7-day period of mourning for his father. So there is a couple of reasons why Ezekiel sat there for 7 days without speaking and without beginning to carry on his mission. Part of it may have been a sort of replacement ordination period, because he didn't actually go through his ordination consecration period as a priest. Part of it may have been a 7-day mourning period. At any rate, God gets to the point where he's ready for Ezekiel to get up and start talking. So at the end of 7 days, now we pick up the story in Ezekiel 3, chapter 3, verse 16. At the end of 7 days, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, or human, remember I mentioned that in the last video. Whenever you see that word, that term, son of man, you can substitute it for just saying human. Human, I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel. So hear the word I speak, and give them warning from me. Ezekiel so far hasn't done that. He has been sitting there for 7 days not speaking. I'm not sure if God is giving him a kick in the seat of the pants here to get started, or what exactly, but it does seem as though he's kind of prompting Ezekiel to go ahead and start talking. When I say to a wicked man, you will surely die, and you do not, he's speaking to Ezekiel here specifically, and you do not warn him or speak out to dissuade him from his evil ways in order to save his life, that wicked man will die for his sin. So just because that guy did not hear a word from God doesn't mean that he's excused from the blame for his sin. That doesn't make him innocent. So he will still die in his sin, or for his sin. But I will hold you accountable for his blood. So if you have the message and don't give it to someone, and that person goes on and dies in his sin, that person will be held responsible for his sin. But you will also be held responsible for not warning him of his sin. But if you do warn the wicked man, and he does not turn from his wickedness, he doesn't listen to you, he just goes ahead and does his own thing, or from his evil ways, he will die for his sin, but you will have saved yourself. So Ezekiel's responsibility is to warn the people. His responsibility is not to change them. If they're going to do that, that's going to happen, whether, regardless of what Ezekiel does. Ezekiel is supposed to warn them. He's supposed to give them the message God gave him to give them. If they do not follow that message, if they do not listen, if they don't pay attention, if they go off and do their own thing anyway, that's on them. That's not on Ezekiel. Ezekiel's not going to be held responsible for their sin if they continue to persist in their sin, even after he warns them. But if he doesn't warn them, he will be held responsible for not doing his part, fulfilling his part of the bargain, which is to warn them. Again, when a righteous, now a lot of Ezekiel, there's actually a fair amount of focus in the book of Ezekiel on individual responsibility. Throughout a lot of the Old Testament, we have seen this idea of corporate responsibility, where the whole community or the whole nation is kind of viewed as being culpable, even when one person sins. Remember, we saw that back in Joshua when Achan sinned. He took the stuff after he took some booty from Jericho. All the stuff from Jericho was supposed to be burned up and given to God in the fire. They weren't supposed to keep any of it, but Achan took some of it for himself and hid it. And God blamed the entire community for that, even though one guy did it. So we've had we've had a lot of focus up until this point on community or corporate responsibility. And you have to remember, this we're talking about 2,500, 3,000 years ago here. And these people lived in a very tribal society. They were tribes. The 12 tribes of Israel were literally a bunch of extended families. And we saw in the book of Judges, when the tribe of Benjamin kind of had a falling out with the rest of the tribes, their instinct, the Benjamite tribe's instinct, was to band together against all the other 11. They had the opportunity. The other 11 tribes came to them and said, turn over the wicked ones to us so we can punish them. And the tribe of Benjamin didn't do it. They banded together and fought all the other 11 tribes, almost to the point of going extinct. In fact, they essentially did go extinct because there were no pure-blooded Benjamites left after that. So pure-blooded Benjamites did go extinct after that. But it makes no sense. It's one tribe against 11. It's like we don't understand why they do that. But in their minds, there's a very strong tribal element. Okay, we're seeing this now emerging in our culture, even with our political tribes becoming so militant and so collectivist in nature. So this concept, this idea of tribalism is rooted deep in the human cultural experience, and even though for a while it appeared as though we were getting over that, we're seeing we kind of reemerge here, not necessarily along family lines or bloodlines, but along political lines. You have these tribes that are emerging in our society today, and it really doesn't matter. The sins of your own tribe don't really matter. When someone from your tribe commits a sin or does something hypocritical or something along those lines, that's excused and forgotten. Just like when the Benjamites committed the sin against the woman at the end of the book of Judges, and the other tribes came to have those guilty people turned over to them for punishment, the rest of the Benjamites didn't give them up. They could have and saved themselves a lot of catastrophe for their overall tribe, but they saw the tribal unity as being more important than seeing to it that certain guilty members of their tribe were held responsible for their sin. So they didn't give up and they fought. And we're kind of doing that again today. We're kind of seeing that emerge in our political discourse today. So there's been a big focus on the corporate or community responsibility in the Old Testament so far, because that just reflects their mindset as tribes, as a group of tribes coming together and trying to organize themselves into a nation. And that would also have been happening around the world, in the world around them at that time. The various other people groups that were out there were also tribal in nature and were forming themselves into nations. And so that's happening not just in Israel, but kind of all over. And so there has been a big emphasis on corporate responsibility up to this point. Ezekiel is going to start focusing on individual responsibility, saying that each man dies for his own sins, not for the sins of his father, not for the sins of his fellow countrymen even, but for his own sins. And there's going to be an emphasis on that in Ezekiel that we haven't really seen this emphasis in the Old Testament up to this point. I mean, this principle has been there from the beginning, but it's really going to be emphasized in Ezekiel in a way that it hasn't been before. Anyway, so starting back with verse 20. Again, when a righteous man turns from his righteousness, and this is the opposite example now. It says a man who is righteous, but he falls from his righteousness and does evil. And I put a stumbling block before him, he will die. Since you did not warn him, he will die for his sin. The righteous things he did will not be remembered. And I will hold you accountable for his blood. So you can fall from grace. You can be in a state of righteousness and leave that state. You can turn and do evil and fall from your saved state. We're not really putting it that way here because this isn't the New Testament, so we're not speaking of it in New Testament terms. But it is possible for someone who has been saved, who has been declared righteous by God, to lose that righteousness, to turn to sin and lose that righteousness. The righteous things he did will not be remembered, and I will hold you accountable for his blood. But if you do warn the righteous man not to sin, and he does not sin, he will surely live, because he took warning, and you will have saved yourself. The hand of the Lord was upon me there, and he said to me, Get up, and go out to the plain, and there I will speak with you. So I got up, and went out to the plain, and the glory of the Lord was standing there, like the glory I had seen by the Kebar River. So he's seeing the vision of the chariot again, and I fell face down. Then the Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet. So he needs help to stand in the presence of this awesomeness. He spoke to me and said, Go, shut yourself inside your house. So he has some kind of house or place where he lives. And he's been in exile for 5 years now. So during this is the 5th year of their exile. So during this time, he at least, Ezekiel, has moved into some sort of house or living structure somewhere in there. And you, son of man, they will tie you up with ropes. You'll be bound, so that you cannot go out among the people. I will make your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth, so that you will be silent and unable to rebuke them, though they are a rebellious house. So he's going to be bound and gagged, in other words. I don't know if this is literal. We're going to get to Ezekiel did a lot of public demonstrations. He acted out his prophecies a lot of the times, and we're going to start reading that imminently here in the next chapter. The whole thing about him being mute and bound, I'm not entirely certain if that was. It might have been. I mean, he may have literally been unable to speak, except for the periods when God gave him a message to speak. He may have been. I just don't know. He may have been literally tied up, although I don't know that either, because we'll find out in the next chapter that he does move around and do things. But anyway, so most of the time when we read about these demonstrations that he did in front of the people, I think he did literally act them out in front of the people. The whole thing about him being bound and gagged, I don't really know. Okay, I'm not really clear what that means exactly. It's just the language is too vague for me to fully grasp what that is. But basically, he wasn't speaking. I'm not sure if he was literally muted. He may have been, but he was only speaking the message God gave him to speak. God gave him a lot to speak, so God gave him a lot of messages during this time. But we're going to find out that apparently he wasn't saying anything else during this period of time except for the words that God gave him to speak that we're going to be reading about here. And somehow or another, he was immobilized for a period of time each day for a year and a half. But we're going to read about that in a moment. Anyway, but when I speak to you, I will open your mouth, and you shall say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Whoever will listen, let him listen. And whoever will refuse, let him refuse. For they are a rebellious house. Okay, let me go ahead and start a new video now. So Ezekiel is now ready to begin his actual ministry. Up until now, we've basically been reading about him receiving this vision from God and being commissioned to be a prophet. And now he is going to actually begin his ministry as a prophet.